Welcome to Your Daily Audiobook, a place where stories come alive, worlds unfold, and every word invites you on a new journey. Today we step into a land of magic, courage, friendship, and wonder, a timeless tale retold with imagination and heart. So find a quiet place, relax, and let the story carry you forward. This is the wonderful Wizard of Oz, retold for your ears, your mind, and your dreams. Chapter 1. Dorothy lived in a small wooden house standing alone on a wide, empty plain. The land around it was flat and gray, with dry grass and a sky that always seemed tired. Her uncle worked outside every day, and her aunt moved quietly through the house, her smile long forgotten. Only Toto, Dorothy's little dog, still brought joy to the place. His bright eyes and wagging tail made the world feel lighter, and Dorothy loved him more than anything. Life there was quiet and dull, and Dorothy often dreamed of places far away, lands filled with color, trees, rivers, and wonders she had never seen. But each morning she woke to the same silent fields and the same pale sky. One day, the air changed. The world outside suddenly grew still, as if the land were listening to something distant. Then a deep wind rose from far away, growing stronger and stronger until it roared across the plain. The sky darkened, twisting into a great spinning shadow. Dorothy's uncle rushed inside and shouted a warning. Her aunt opened the trapdoor to the storm cellar and called for Dorothy to follow. But Toto, frightened by the noise, darted under the bed and refused to come out. The wind shook the house so hard the floor trembled beneath her feet. Dust swirled through the air and the walls groaned like an old ship at sea. Dorothy dropped to her knees, reached under the bed, and at last caught Toto in her arms. She turned toward the cellar door, but it was too late. With a mighty roar, the storm lifted the house from the ground. It swayed, tilted, and spun as though some unseen force had caught it and carried it into the sky. Dorothy clung to a post and held Toto close while dishes shattered and chairs slid across the floor. Then, slowly, the terrible shaking faded. The house no longer jolted and spun. Instead, it began to drift, gently and silently, as though floating on a soft, invisible sea. The wind outside became a distant hum. The room grew strangely calm. Dorothy crept to the window and looked out. There was no land. No sky. Only pale swirling mist, glowing faintly like a dream. She felt as if the world she knew had vanished, and she and Toto were traveling somewhere far beyond it. Time seemed to disappear. The house rocked softly, and after a while Dorothy grew tired. Holding Toto close, she closed her eyes and drifted into an uneasy sleep. When she awoke, everything was quiet. The house no longer moved. The air felt still, and a warm, gentle light poured through the window. Toto barked softly, curious and alert. Dorothy stood, her heart beating fast, and walked to the door. Outside was not the great plain she had left behind. She saw bright green grass, shining trees, and flowers in colors she had never imagined. The sky was deep blue and clear, and the air carried sweet scents and soft birdsong. The world before her looked magical, alive, and full of mystery. Dorothy realized that the storm had carried her far away, to a place unlike anything she had ever known. With Toto at her side, she reached for the door. She took a breath and stepped toward a land that would change her life forever. Chapter 2. Dorothy stepped outside with Toto close beside her. The soft grass felt cool beneath her shoes, and the warm air carried the sweet scent of strange flowers. Everything around her shimmered with color and life. Trees with shining leaves rose nearby, and bright birds sang in the branches as if welcoming her to this new world. For a moment, Dorothy simply stood there, full of wonder. The land felt peaceful, almost magical, as if every blade of grass and every petal knew secrets she did not yet understand. Toto barked happily and ran in small circles, thrilled by all the new smells and sounds. Then, in the distance, Dorothy noticed movement. 3 small figures were walking toward her along a path of smooth, yellow stones that wound gently through the grass. They were unlike any people Dorothy had ever seen. Their clothes were bright and decorated with curious shapes, and their hats were tall and pointed, as if they belonged to a cheerful festival. As they came nearer, Dorothy saw their kind faces, lined with age yet glowing with warmth. They walked slowly, with great care and respect, as though approaching someone important. Toto stopped barking and stood very still, watching them with alert eyes. Behind them came another figure, a woman dressed in pure white. Her gown shimmered softly in the sunlight, and a gentle sparkle seemed to follow her, as if the air around her carried a faint magic. Her eyes were calm and bright, and her smile felt kind and reassuring. Dorothy felt both nervous and curious. She held Toto close as the small people stopped before her and bowed low, as if greeting a queen. The woman in white stepped forward. Her voice was soft and musical when she spoke. She thanked Dorothy, truly thanked her, for something Dorothy did not yet understand. The woman explained that when Dorothy's house had fallen from the sky, it had landed upon a wicked sorceress who had ruled this land with cruelty and fear. Because of this, the people were now free. Dorothy listened in shock. She turned toward the corner of the house, and only then saw a pair of strange, curling shoes peeking out from beneath it. The rest had vanished, leaving only those shoes behind, bright and shining in the sun. A quiet shiver ran through Dorothy. She had never wished harm on anyone. She had never faced magic or witches before. The world she had entered was wondrous, but also filled with things she did not fully understand. The woman in white gently touched Dorothy's shoulder and told her not to be afraid. She explained that the wicked sorceress had done many terrible things, and the people had long hoped to be free of her. Dorothy had not meant to cause it, but fate had chosen her as the one to end that dark rule. The small people bowed again, filled with gratitude. Then the woman spoke of something else. She told Dorothy that this land was far away from her home, beyond deserts, forests, and strange places full of magic. No one there knew how to send a small girl back across such wonders and dangers. Dorothy's heart sank. She thought of her aunt and uncle waiting on the lonely gray plain. She imagined their worry, their fear, their sadness when they found the house gone. Tears stung her eyes, and she asked softly how she could ever return to them. The woman looked at her with kindness. There was someone, she said, who might know the way, a great and mysterious wizard who lived in a distant city made of shining emerald stone. If anyone in this land had the power to help Dorothy, it was him. To reach him, she would have to follow the yellow road that wound onward across the fields and hills. It would be a long journey through strange lands and unknown dangers, but it was her best hope. Dorothy looked down at Toto, who gazed back at her with trusting eyes. The thought of traveling so far frightened her, yet inside her heart something steady and brave began to grow. She did not want to stay lost in a strange world forever. She wanted to go home. The woman in white then pointed to the shoes beneath the fallen house. She said they were filled with hidden magic and no one truly knew the extent of their power, but they now belonged to Dorothy. The small people brought them to her with great care. Dorothy slipped them on. They fit perfectly. The shoes sparkled faintly in the sunlight, as if quietly awake. The woman smiled gently and wished Dorothy good fortune. Then, as softly as a breeze, she faded away, shimmering into the air until she was gone. The bright land grew quiet once more. Dorothy stood at the edge of the yellow road, Toto beside her, the strange shoes on her feet, and the wide world of magic stretching ahead. Her heart beat fast. She did not know what waited beyond the hills. But she knew one thing: her journey had just begun. Chapter 3. Dorothy and Toto followed the yellow road as it wound gently across bright fields and quiet meadows. The soft grass rustled in the warm breeze, and strange little insects shimmered in the sunlight as they drifted through the air. Though the land was beautiful, Dorothy sometimes felt a small ache in her heart when she thought of home. Still, she kept walking, because the road was the only path that might lead her back. After some time, they came upon a wide cornfield stretching out on both sides of the road. Tall golden stalks swayed softly, their leaves whispering like faint voices. In the middle of the field stood a wooden post with a figure tied to it, a scarecrow, dressed in old, faded clothes stuffed full of straw. His face was painted with simple eyes, a round nose, and a crooked smile. Dorothy paused. Something about him felt strangely alive. She looked up at the painted face, and to her surprise, one of the eyes blinked. Then the other. The scarecrow tilted his head slightly, as though trying to see her better. "Good day," he said in a gentle, friendly voice. Dorothy gasped softly, while Toto growled in confusion. The scarecrow spoke politely and asked if she would be kind enough to untie him, for he had been stuck on the pole for as long as he could remember. He could move his arms and his head, but his legs hung uselessly and he could not step down on his own. Dorothy carefully climbed onto the fence, reached up, and helped loosen the ropes. The scarecrow slid down the pole and landed softly on his feet. He wobbled for a moment, then steadied himself and bowed gratefully. He thanked her again and again, his voice full of warmth. Dorothy asked how he could speak if he was made of straw. The scarecrow explained, in a simple and thoughtful way, that he did not know how he had come to life. He only knew that he could move, talk, and think, though he believed he was missing something important. He said that his head was filled with straw, not a brain, and because of that, he feared he was foolish. He could stand in a field and wave at birds, but he could not understand the world properly. He wished more than anything to be truly wise. Dorothy listened kindly, and told him that he did not seem foolish at all. He answered her questions clearly, and his voice carried gentle curiosity. But the scarecrow shook his head and said that wisdom was not about sounding kind, it was about truly knowing things, and he wanted to know, think, and understand like other people. Dorothy then told him about the great wizard she was traveling to see, and how she hoped he might help her return home. The scarecrow's eyes brightened with interest. Perhaps, he said, this wizard might also give him a real brain. Dorothy smiled and said he was welcome to join her on the journey. The scarecrow felt joyful at the thought. He had never walked freely, never seen the world beyond the cornfield. He stepped forward, and immediately stumbled into a small ditch. His arms and legs tangled as he tumbled over, straw sticking out in every direction. Toto barked wildly while Dorothy hurried to help. The scarecrow laughed at himself, cheerful even in clumsy moments. He said his legs were still learning how to move, but he would not give up. With Dorothy's help, he climbed out, brushed himself off, and tried again. This time, he walked more carefully, a bit crooked, but with determination. As they continued along the road, Dorothy found that the scarecrow asked many questions. He wondered about distant lands, about the sky, about the strange magic of the world. He worried again that without a brain, his questions meant nothing. But Dorothy noticed something. His questions were thoughtful. His words were gentle. His heart, though made of straw, seemed kind and full of life. They walked together through fields of light and shadow, with the yellow road stretching endlessly ahead. The scarecrow liked to talk, and Dorothy found comfort in his company. Toto slowly grew used to him and trotted at his side, occasionally sniffing at his straw hands. Yet, beneath the peaceful silence of the land, a faint uneasiness lingered. The Scarecrow asked Dorothy if the road was safe. She admitted softly that she did not know. The wizard lived far away, and the world between here and there was filled with unknown places and mysterious beings. The breeze shifted. The tall grass whispered more sharply. Somewhere in the distance, something moved. Dorothy, Toto, and the Scarecrow stopped for a moment on the yellow stones. The warm sunlight suddenly felt thinner, and the shadows at the edge of the fields seemed deeper. They exchanged a quiet glance. Their journey had only just begun. And something, or someone, might already be watching them from the road ahead. Chapter 4. Dorothy, Toto, and the Scarecrow followed the yellow road as it curved into a deep, quiet forest. The trees grew tall and close together, their branches forming a soft green ceiling that filtered the sunlight into gentle, shifting patterns on the ground. The air felt cooler here, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves wrapped around them like a whispering song. The Scarecrow moved carefully, still learning how to walk without stumbling, while Dorothy walked beside him, and Toto trotted ahead, his ears twitching at every sound. Though the forest was peaceful, there was an echoing stillness beneath it, as if the woods were holding their breath. After a while, they came to a small clearing where the trees opened into a quiet space filled with ferns and moss. In the middle of it stood a strange figure, tall, stiff, and shining like polished silver. It was a man made entirely of metal. His arms, legs, and body were shaped like a real person, but his joints were built from smooth plates and bolts. His face was carefully crafted, with a nose, a mouth, and eyes that looked frozen in silence. He held an axe raised halfway in the air, as if he had stopped in the middle of a swing and never finished the motion. Dorothy stepped closer and saw that a thin coat of rust covered his joints, locking him in place. He could not move even a finger. Then, faintly, a voice creaked from inside the metal figure. It was slow and strained, like a dry hinge trying to turn. He begged them softly to bring him oil, to loosen his stiff joints. Dorothy and the Scarecrow searched around the clearing and soon found a small oil can hidden behind a nearby tree. Working carefully, they rubbed oil onto his elbows, his knees, his neck, and finally his jaw. Bit by bit, the metal softened. The man shuddered slightly, then slowly lowered his axe. He stretched his arms and legs, tilting his head from side to side as if waking from a deep, painful sleep. When he finally could move freely, he let out a sound that was almost like a sigh. He thanked them deeply. His voice, now clear and strong, sounded calm and gentle. He explained that long ago he had worked in this forest, cutting wood happily each day. But then he had suffered a terrible misfortune. One piece of his life after another had slowly been replaced with metal, until at last his heart was lost as well. Now, he said, he believed he had no heart at all. He could move, think, and speak, but he felt empty inside, unable to love, unable to feel true joy. The other creatures of the forest did not understand his sorrow, but it weighed on him every moment he stood alone among the trees. Dorothy listened with sympathy and told him about her journey to see the great wizard in the distant Emerald City. The Scarecrow explained that he wished for a brain. When the Tin Man heard this, a soft hope sparked inside him. Perhaps, he said, the wizard could also give him a heart. Dorothy smiled and invited him to join them. The Tin Man agreed at once. He said he did not want to stand still in the forest any longer, rusting alone with his empty chest. If there was even the smallest chance to feel again, to laugh, to love, to care, he would gladly walk any road. So the four of them, a girl, a dog, a straw man, and a man of shining metal, set off together along the Yellowstones. As they walked beneath the tall trees, the Scarecrow spoke cheerfully about the journey ahead, dreaming of wisdom and knowledge. The Tin Man walked quietly, listening to the wind through the leaves, wishing he could feel even a small piece of its beauty inside his heart. Dorothy walked between them, grateful for their company, yet still longing for home. The forest grew darker as they continued. The trees thickened, the path narrowed, and the shadows stretched long across the yellow road. The air turned heavy and hushed, and even Toto slowed his steps, his ears folding back in caution. A faint sound echoed through the woods. Not birds. Not wind. Something deeper. Something alive. Dorothy and her companions stopped and looked ahead into the deep, silent shadows of the forest. Somewhere out there, a powerful creature was waiting, and they were walking straight toward it. Chapter 5. The yellow road wound deeper into the forest, where the trees grew taller and thicker, their branches twisting together like great wooden arms. The light faded until only thin beams slipped through the leaves, falling across the path in pale stripes. The air was heavy and still, and every step echoed quietly beneath the dark canopy. Dorothy walked carefully, Toto close at her feet. The Scarecrow moved softly beside her, and the Tin Man's metal joints gave off a faint, echoing sound with each step, gentle, but clear in the silence. No birds sang here. No insects buzzed. It felt as though the entire forest were watching them. Then, without warning, a mighty roar shattered the quiet. It rolled through the trees like thunder and shook the ground beneath their feet. Toto barked wildly, and Dorothy clutched him in fear. Out from the shadows leapt a huge lion, golden fur, sharp claws, and eyes that blazed like fire. He sprang onto the path with a fierce snarl, his mane rising like a burning crown. The lion roared again and rushed straight toward them, jaws wide, teeth flashing. Dorothy froze in terror, but before the lion could reach them, the Tin Man raised his axe and stepped forward protectively. The Scarecrow moved as well, spreading his straw-filled arms as if to shield Dorothy. Still the lion charged. In a burst of sudden courage, Dorothy stepped forward and struck him across the nose with her hand. The sound echoed sharply in the still air. The lion stopped at once. He blinked, stumbled back, and looked at Dorothy with wide, startled eyes. Then, to everyone's surprise, his fierce expression collapsed. His lips trembled, and his great body shook. And the mighty lion began to cry. His deep, rumbling sobs filled the forest, raw and helpless. He said he was ashamed that although he was king of the beasts, he had no courage. He roared and frightened others, but inside he trembled with fear at every danger, every shadow, every sound. He wept because he wanted to be brave, but no matter how hard he tried, he felt weak. Dorothy's fear softened into compassion. The Tin Man, who longed for a heart, gently wiped one of the lion's tears with his metal hand. The Scarecrow told him kindly that they too were missing something important: a brain, a heart, a home. Then Dorothy spoke of the great wizard in the distant Emerald City. She said they were traveling to ask him for help, and perhaps he could give the lion courage as well. A quiet hope lit the lion's eyes. He asked, in a trembling voice, if he could join them. He said he was tired of pretending to be fearless when he was frightened of everything inside. If there was even a chance that courage could be found, he wanted to seek it. Dorothy smiled softly and welcomed him. The lion walked beside them now, tall and strong on the outside, yet gentle and uncertain within. He tried to hold his head high as they continued along the yellow road, but Dorothy could see the doubt still flickering behind his golden eyes. Together, a girl, a dog, a scarecrow, a tin man, and a lion who longed to be brave, they left the deep forest behind. But as the path opened into distant hills and wide, mysterious lands ahead, They knew their journey was only growing stranger and far more dangerous. Chapter 6. The yellow road led the travelers out of the forest and into rolling hills covered with soft grass and bright wildflowers. The air felt warmer here, and the sky stretched wide and blue above them. Dorothy felt lighter with every step, and even the lions seemed calmer as the land opened around them. In the distance, something shimmered. Spread across the landscape was a vast field of poppies, endless waves of red petals glowing beneath the sun. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, filling the air with a sweet, dreamy scent. The field looked peaceful, soft, and strangely inviting, as if it were calling them forward. Dorothy smiled when she saw it. The Scarecrow admired the colors. The Tin Man watched quietly. The Lion lifted his head, breathing in deeply. They walked into the field. With every step, the sweet scent grew stronger, warm, heavy, and comforting. Dorothy felt her eyelids grow heavy. Her thoughts slowed. The world around her softened into a hazy blur. Toto whined softly, pressing closer to her legs, sensing something was wrong. The Scarecrow noticed Dorothy's head drooping and called out to her, but his voice sounded distant and far away. The Lion slowed too, his great paws sinking into the soft earth as he moved. His breath became deep and slow, his eyes half closed. The poppies were enchanted. They did not harm straw or metal, but they pulled living hearts toward sleep. Dorothy staggered and fell gently into the flowers, her cheek resting against the red petals. She whispered weakly to Toto, but her voice faded, and her body grew still. Toto curled against her chest, trembling, until the heavy scent pulled him into silence too. The Lion tried to keep walking. He forced his paws forward, fighting the strange magic, but the deeper he went, the heavier his body became. His legs trembled. His great head drooped. At last, with a deep sigh, he collapsed among the scarlet waves and lay motionless. Only the Scarecrow and the Tin Man remained standing. The Scarecrow shook Dorothy's shoulder, but she did not wake. The Tin Man tried to lift the Lion, but his great body was too heavy to move far. The field stretched endlessly around them, beautiful, bright, and deadly. They could not carry Dorothy. They could not drag the Lion. And every moment they stayed, the air grew thicker with sleep. The Scarecrow looked across the field and saw the yellow road disappear in the distance. Beyond the poppies stood unknown lands, and far beyond those waited the Emerald City. He turned to the Tin Man. They would need help, or the field would become a silent grave of flowers. The wind passed gently over the red petals, whispering softly across Dorothy's sleeping form, while the world around them waited in uneasy stillness. Something, or someone, would have to save them soon, or they would never leave the poppy field at all. Chapter 7. The Scarecrow and the Tin Man stood helpless among the endless red poppies. Dorothy lay silent in the soft petals, and Toto slept against her chest. Farther away, the Lion's great golden body rested still and heavy, his mane spread across the flowers like a fading sun. The air was thick with the sweet, enchanted scent. The Scarecrow felt no sleep, but he felt fear, not for himself, but for his friends. The Tin Man's metal face did not change, yet his voice trembled softly. He said that if they did nothing, Dorothy and the Lion might never wake again. They could not carry the Lion. They could barely move Dorothy. The Scarecrow thought quickly. Though he believed he had no brain, ideas still stirred like small sparks inside him. He turned to the Tin Man and pointed toward the far edge of the field, where the flowers ended and the land rose into gentle hills. "If we can bring them there," he said, "the spell will fade." But the distance was too great to drag them through the flowers. They needed another way. Just then, A soft glimmer shimmered in the air above them, like faint starlight in daylight. A gentle breeze swept across the field, bending the poppies in a slow wave. The Scarecrow and Tin Man looked up as a familiar figure appeared, as light and graceful as a floating petal. It was the kind woman in white. She had returned. Her eyes grew sad when she saw Dorothy lying still among the flowers. She said the poppy field was woven with deep magic, a magic of sleep that would not harm straw or metal, but lured warm blood and beating hearts into endless dreams. With a soft motion of her hand, she called upon the wind. Tiny silver shapes fluttered through the air, field mice, small and swift, gathering in great numbers around the lion. Their queen, tiny but proud, bowed before the woman in white and listened carefully to her words. The Scarecrow and Tin Man watched in awe as the mice quickly formed lines, bringing ropes and weaving them together. The Tin Man helped gently, guiding the ropes beneath the lion's heavy body. The mice pulled with all their strength, their small paws moving in perfect rhythm. Slowly, inch by inch, they dragged the lion out of the poppies and onto the fresh green grass beyond the enchanted field. The wind shifted. The sweet, heavy scent lifted. The lion stirred. His eyelids fluttered, his breath deepened, and at last he woke with a soft, confused groan. He lifted his head weakly and thanked the mice with humble gratitude, his voice trembling with relief. Meanwhile, the Scarecrow and Tin Man carefully carried Dorothy out of the poppies. The air beyond the field felt clearer, lighter, alive. Toto woke first, shaking his ears and barking softly. Then Dorothy's eyes opened. She looked around in wonder, still dazed, as if waking from a deep dream. When she saw her friends leaning over her, her fear melted into relief. The woman in white smiled gently. She told Dorothy that great journeys were filled with beauty and danger, and every step ahead would test courage, kindness, and wisdom. Then, like a soft beam of light fading into the sky, she disappeared once more. The Scarecrow thanked the mice again, bowing deeply. The Tin Man bowed as well, and the lion lowered his head in deep respect. The mice scurried away into the grass, their tiny forms vanishing like whispers. The travelers rested a moment, breathing the fresh air. The lion stared back at the red field, humbled by how helpless he had been. The Scarecrow stood quietly thoughtful. The Tin Man touched the side of his chest where his missing heart should have been, wishing he could feel the gratitude he knew he ought to feel. Dorothy took Toto into her arms and looked toward the distant horizon. The yellow road continued on. Far away, faint and distant, the world shimmered with unknown lands and silent promise. Their journey was not finished. It was only growing deeper and stranger. Chapter 8. After resting at the edge of the poppy field, Dorothy and her friends continued along the yellow road. The land ahead grew brighter and more beautiful with every step. Soft hills rolled beneath a clear sky, and sparkling streams crossed the path like silver ribbons. The air felt fresh and full of promise, as if the world itself were guiding them forward. Far in the distance, something shone. At first it looked like a faint green glow on the horizon, soft, distant, mysterious. But as they walked, the glow grew brighter, shimmering like light reflected from polished glass. Towers began to rise into view, tall and smooth, gleaming in the sunlight. Walls sparkled like precious jewels, and rooftops glowed with deep emerald color. The Scarecrow pointed ahead in wonder. The Tin Man stopped for a moment, struck silent by the beauty before him. The lion's eyes widened, filled with awe and nervous excitement. Toto barked softly, as if sensing something grand and important. Dorothy felt her heart flutter. They had reached the Emerald City. The great walls loomed high above the road, glowing with a deep, shining green. Every stone sparkled as though made from crystal. At the base of the walls stood enormous gates, tall, polished, and bright as jewels. A guard with a pointed green hat watched from a small doorway set into the gate. Dorothy approached slowly and explained why they had come. The guard listened carefully. His expression shifted from curiosity to surprise when he heard that they wished to see the great wizard himself. Few people dared to make such a request. Still, he looked at Dorothy, at the lion, at the Tin Man, and at the Scarecrow, and something in their faces told him they were not ordinary travelers. He disappeared inside the gate for a moment. When he returned, he opened the doors. A flood of green light washed over them. Beyond the gate stretched streets paved with smooth, shining stone. Every building sparkled with emerald glass. Windows gleamed like polished gems. People walked through the streets dressed in shades of green, deep, bright, and shimmering. Even their hats, shoes, and ribbons glowed with color. Dorothy felt as if she had stepped into a living jewel. The guard gave them each a pair of green spectacles and explained that everyone in the city wore them to protect their eyes from the brilliance of the shining stone. Dorothy placed them on her face, and the world shimmered even more brightly, every surface glowing with rich emerald light. The people of the city paused as the travelers passed. Some whispered softly. Some stared in wide-eyed curiosity. A girl with a brave gaze. A man of straw. A shining man of metal. A lion who walked like a king. They were led through winding streets and towering archways until at last they reached a great palace rising high above the city. Its walls glittered like a mountain of emerald glass, and its tall doors shone as if carved from pure crystal. Dorothy's hands trembled. This was the home of the great wizard. The guard bowed and told them they would not see him all together. Each would enter alone and speak to the wizard in turn. His ways were mysterious, his power vast, and no one truly knew his real form. Dorothy felt a mixture of hope and fear. What kind of being lived behind those shining doors? A kind king? A wise spirit? A terrible sorcerer? The palace hall grew silent. The doors began to open. A cool green light spilled out across the floor as Dorothy stepped forward, her heart racing, ready to face the unknown power that might decide her fate. And the fate of all her companions. Chapter 9. Dorothy stepped into the great hall of the Emerald Palace, her footsteps echoing softly across the smooth, shining floor. The air inside was cool and still, filled with a faint green glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Tall pillars rose into darkness above, and the space felt vast, silent, and powerful. Toto stayed close at her heels, though even he moved carefully, as if he sensed the weight of the place. At the far end of the hall, a soft light deepened into a bright, radiant glow. It pulsed slowly, like the breath of a giant hidden within the walls. Dorothy's heart beat faster. She felt very small in that enormous room, surrounded by magic and mystery. Then a voice filled the hall. It was deep and booming, rolling through the air like thunder across the sky. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the walls, the pillars, the floor beneath her feet. The sound trembled inside her chest. The voice asked why she had come. Dorothy gathered her courage and explained, her voice gentle but steady. She spoke of the storm that had carried her far from home, of the strange land she had fallen into, and of her longing to return to her aunt and uncle on the lonely gray plain. The great voice listened in silence. It spoke again, slow and powerful, saying that nothing in this world was given freely, not magic, not wishes, not dreams. If Dorothy wanted help, she would have to prove herself worthy of it. The green light brightened. The voice told her of a terrible sorceress who ruled a distant land filled with fear and darkness. This sorceress was cruel and dangerous, and her power spread like a long, cold shadow. If Dorothy wished to return home, She must go out into that land and destroy the wicked witch. Dorothy felt her breath catch. She had never battled anyone, never faced true danger on purpose. She was only a girl with a small dog and a hope for home. Fear rose inside her, real and sharp, but she thought of her aunt, her uncle, their quiet house, the life she longed to see again. Her voice trembled as she asked if there was no other way. The voice answered firmly. There was none. Dorothy lowered her head. She did not want to face such a terrible task, but the path home lay through that danger, and nowhere else. With a quiet strength, she agreed. The green light dimmed. The voice faded into silence. The great hall felt empty again. Dorothy turned and slowly left the chamber, Toto trotting gently beside her. Outside in the palace corridor, she met the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, each waiting anxiously for their own turn. One by one they entered the hall. And one by one they returned, each silent at first, each carrying the same troubled expression. The Scarecrow had been promised a brain, but only if the witch was destroyed. The Tin Man had been promised a heart, but only after the witch was gone. The Lion had been promised courage, but only when the witch no longer lived. The Wizard had given them all the same command. They stood together in the bright green corridor, the emerald light glimmering softly along the walls. None of them spoke for a moment. The task ahead felt vast and frightening. Then Dorothy lifted her eyes. They had come so far already, through storms, forests, magic fields, and enchanted dangers. They would face this one too. Not alone. Together. The Lion swallowed his fear. The Tin Man straightened his metal shoulders. The Scarecrow nodded quietly, determination glowing in his painted eyes. Far beyond the city walls, a dark land waited. And somewhere within it, the wicked witch watched, unaware that 4 unlikely travelers were already on their way toward her shadowed kingdom. Chapter 10. Dorothy and her friends left the shining Emerald City behind, passing once more through its great green gates. The yellow road stretched ahead of them, winding into distant hills where the lights slowly faded and the sky grew darker and heavier. The land no longer felt bright and welcoming. It felt quiet, watchful, uneasy. The Scarecrow walked thoughtfully, his straw rustling softly in the wind. The Tin Man carried his axe at his side, its metal surface reflecting faint patches of light. The Lion padded close to Dorothy, his steps strong on the outside, though his eyes revealed a flicker of fear. Toto stayed alert, his ears twitching at every sound. They knew they were entering the witch's territory. The air grew colder. The trees twisted into strange shapes, their branches bent like clawed fingers reaching across the road. The grass turned darker, and the birds that flew above did not sing, they only circled in silence, as if warning travelers to turn back. Dorothy felt a chill travel down her spine, but she kept walking. Somewhere far away, the witch had already heard of them. In a dark tower rising above a shadowed valley, the wicked witch stood at a narrow window, her eyes sharp and cold. She watched the land below through swirling clouds of smoke, and whispered to the strange creatures that guarded her realm. She knew about the little girl with the magic shoes. She knew about the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. And she feared the shoes more than anything. The witch slammed her staff against the floor and called for her servants. Winged shapes lifted into the sky, dark, swift, and silent, flying out across the land to watch the travelers' every step. Dorothy and her friends did not see them at first. They only felt the growing tension in the air, as if unseen eyes followed them from the shadows. The Lion glanced over his shoulder again and again. The Tin Man held his axe tighter. The Scarecrow whispered that they must stay close together, no matter what. They reached a dry, cracked valley where the wind moaned through empty rocks. The yellow road faded into rough earth, broken and uneven. Strange shapes moved in the distance, crooked creatures with twisted bodies and long arms that stretched wider than should be possible. They were the witches' guards. They lurched forward, blocking the path with grinning, cruel faces. Their voices hissed through crooked teeth as they mocked the travelers, saying no one passed through this land unless the witch allowed it. The lion trembled but tried to stand tall. The Scarecrow looked frightened but searched for an idea. The Tin Man raised his axe, not with anger, but with firm resolve. Dorothy stepped forward, her voice steady though her heart pounded inside her chest. She told the creatures that she would not turn back, she had come too far, and she would not give up now. For a moment, the creatures hesitated. Then the sky darkened. A cold wind swept over the valley. Great wings beat the air above them as shadows swept down from the clouds, the witches' flying servants, circling in a dark, spiraling storm. Dorothy clutched Toto to her chest. The lion lowered his head, bracing himself. The Scarecrow and Tin Man stood close beside them. The air filled with rushing wind and sharp, echoing cries. The witch's power was no longer distant. It was here, moving closer, reaching for them. And the road ahead was about to become far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. Chapter 11. The sky above the cracked valley swirled with shadows as the witches' winged servants circled lower and lower, their dark shapes sweeping through the air like storms come to life. Their wings beat with sharp, heavy gusts that rattled the rocks and bent the twisted grass. Dorothy held Toto close, her heart pounding as the air filled with the sound of rushing wind and echoing cries. The lion tried to roar, but fear trembled in his voice. The Scarecrow spread his straw-filled arms as if to shield Dorothy, while the Tin Man lifted his axe, his metal hands steady even as the danger grew nearer. Then the creatures swooped down. They moved too fast to fight. Their claws gripped and tore, not out of cruelty, but with cold obedience to the witch's command. One seized the Scarecrow, scattering straw across the valley as it ripped his body apart. Another grabbed the Tin Man and hurled him to the ground, leaving him dented and unable to rise. The lion struggled and fought, but more wings surrounded him, forcing him down until his strength gave way. Dorothy cried out, but a pair of powerful wings lifted her into the air. Toto barked desperately as the ground fell away beneath them. The wind howled in her ears as the dark creatures carried her across the land toward the witch's fortress, a grim, jagged castle rising from black rocks under a heavy sky. Inside the tower, the wicked witch waited. Her eyes glowed with triumph when Dorothy was brought before her. She did not care about the lion, the Tin Man, or the Scarecrow. All she wanted were the shining shoes on Dorothy's feet, the shoes filled with magic she longed to control. The witch smiled a thin, cruel smile. But when she reached for the shoes, she could not take them. Some unseen force protected them, as if an invisible barrier guarded Dorothy while she wore them. The witch's anger burned like fire. She could not tear the shoes away, but she could hold Dorothy prisoner. She ordered her servants to lock Dorothy in a small room high in the tower. Toto slipped from their grasp and ran free through the dark halls, but Dorothy was trapped. The doors shut with a heavy clang, leaving her alone with the distant echoes of the castle. Outside, cold clouds swirled. Inside, Dorothy sat quietly, afraid, but not broken. She thought of her friends scattered across the witch's land, the Scarecrow torn apart, the Tin Man lying helpless, the lion taken away in chains. She closed her eyes and whispered to Toto, wherever he was. They were separated, but they were not defeated. Somewhere in that dark fortress, hope still flickered, faint, fragile, but alive. And the witch, in all her power, had no idea that the strength of Dorothy and her friends had only begun to awaken. Chapter 12. Far below the witch's tower, in a dark courtyard surrounded by sharp stone walls, the lion lay inside a heavy iron cage. Thick bars curved over him like a cruel metal web, leaving only a narrow gap through which the cold wind slipped inside. The ground was hard and bare, and the sky above was a dull, heavy gray. The lion rested with his head on his paws, his golden mane tangled and dusty. Chains hung from the bars, rattling softly whenever he moved. His great body looked strong, but inside, fear trembled like a small hidden flame. Nearby, strange guards paced back and forth, watching the cage with wary eyes. They whispered among themselves, speaking of the witch's commands, of the girl with the magic shoes, and of how the lion was to remain trapped until the witch decided otherwise. The lion listened in silence. He had always believed himself a coward, afraid of danger, afraid of pain, afraid of the world itself. Now, surrounded by stone and iron, with the witch's shadow looming over everything, that fear felt heavier than ever. But something else was rising beneath it. He thought of Dorothy, small, kind, and brave, locked somewhere in the dark tower above. He thought of the Scarecrow and the Tin Man, scattered and broken across the witch's land. He remembered how they had walked together, shared hope together, faced storms and dangers side by side. He was afraid. Yet he cared more than he feared. And for the first time, he wondered if courage was not the absence of fear, but the strength to stand in spite of it. Toto appeared at the edge of the courtyard, slipping like a small shadow between the stones. His eyes were bright and determined. He crept to the cage and pressed his nose between the bars, letting out a soft, urgent bark. The lion lifted his head, surprise flashing across his eyes, then relief. He whispered to Toto through the bars, asking if Dorothy was safe. Toto gave a faint whine and looked toward the dark tower, as if to say she was still trapped, but not lost. The lion understood. He would not wait quietly for fear to rule him. He rose to his feet, the chains clinking softly, and tested the bars with his great paws. They were strong, harder than stone, colder than ice. But the lion did not turn away. He spoke to Toto again, telling him to find help, to find the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, anyone who still remained. Toto nodded, as if he understood every word. Then he vanished back into the shadows. Night settled over the fortress. The guards grew weary. The witch's servants moved more slowly through the halls. And deep inside the cage, the lion closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in quiet determination. He would endure the chains. He would endure the fear. He would endure the darkness. Because somewhere in that tower, a friend needed him. And when the moment came, he would be ready to rise. Far away, beyond the walls and the swirling shadows, tiny sparks of hope began to gather, unseen, fragile, yet steadily moving back toward one another. As the first threads of rescue slowly began to weave themselves into fate. Chapter 13. In a lonely corner of the witch's land, the Scarecrow lay scattered across the ground. Pieces of straw were strewn over the dry earth, and his clothes hung loose and empty, fluttering softly in the cold wind. His painted face rested nearby, tilted toward the gray sky. For a moment, everything was silent. Then a tiny rustle moved through the straw. A faint spark of awareness stirred, not in a brain of flesh, but in the gentle spirit that lived within him. Though his body was torn apart, his thoughts were still alive. He could not move, but he could feel the world around him, and he refused to give up. Soon, small shapes crept from the grass, field mice, the same brave little creatures who had once helped save the lion. They remembered the kind Scarecrow who had bowed to their queen and spoken with respect. Now, seeing him broken and helpless, they gathered around him once more. Their tiny voices whispered softly. They called to others. More mice appeared. Then birds. Then small woodland creatures. Together, they began to carry his straw back into his clothes, piece by piece, gathering every scattered fragment with patient care. The Scarecrow felt each bit return to him like gentle breaths of life. They lifted his hat, set his head upright, and tucked the last strands into place. At last, the Scarecrow stood again. Crooked, wobbly, but whole. He thanked the creatures with deep gratitude, his voice filled with warmth. Though he still believed himself without a brain, he understood something important. Kindness had power, and friends returned to those who showed it. Not far away, the Tin Man lay where the flying servants had dropped him. His metal body was dented, his limbs twisted, and his joints stiff with dust. He could not move his arms or legs, but his voice remained, faint and hollow. He called out softly into the empty air. At first, no one answered. Then Toto appeared, quick, silent, determined. The little dog barked sharply and tugged at the Tin Man's sleeve, refusing to leave him behind. Before long, the Scarecrow arrived, stumbling across the rough ground with all the dignity he could manage. The two friends greeted one another with relief. Together, they worked to set the Tin Man upright. The Scarecrow bent his clumsy straw fingers, pressing the twisted metal back into place as best he could. Toto raced off and returned with an old oil can he had found hidden among the rocks. Drop by drop, they oiled the Tin Man's joints. Slowly, his arms loosened. Then his legs. Then his neck. With a creaking shudder, he rose to his feet once more. The Tin Man did not have a heart, yet his voice trembled with emotion as he thanked them. He said that if he ever gained a real heart, moments like this would fill it with more feeling than he could ever describe. The Scarecrow smiled gently. They stood together beneath the darkening sky, a man of straw, a man of metal, and a small determined dog, no longer broken, no longer scattered, but united once again. Then Toto turned toward the distant fortress. He barked once. Clear. Urgent. The Scarecrow and Tin Man understood. Dorothy was still trapped. The lion was still caged. And the witch still ruled from her dark tower. They tightened their resolve. No matter the danger, no matter the shadows, they would not abandon their friends. Step by careful step, they began their journey toward the witch's stronghold, moving through fear, through darkness, through the land that whispered of doom, carrying with them a quiet, unbreakable hope. And somewhere far ahead, the first fragile threads of reunion slowly drew closer, toward a meeting that would change everything. Chapter 14. The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and Toto moved carefully across the dark land, keeping low among rocks and twisted trees as they approached the witch's fortress. The walls rose high and jagged above them, black stone cutting into the gray sky like the edge of a broken blade. Narrow windows glowed faintly with cold, flickering light. Toto stopped beneath the wall and let out a quiet bark. He had found a hidden passage, a narrow crack between fallen stones where the wall had crumbled just enough for them to slip through. The Scarecrow squeezed sideways, his straw rustling softly, while the Tin Man moved with careful, silent steps. Toto darted ahead like a small shadow guiding them forward. Inside the fortress courtyard, the air felt heavy and silent. Strange guards patrolled the towers, but their attention was fixed elsewhere, trusting the strength of the witch's magic to keep intruders away. The Scarecrow whispered that they must not be seen. The Tin Man nodded and led them along the darkest edges of the walls. Toto paused suddenly. His ears lifted. He looked upward toward the highest tower. Dorothy was there. They climbed a winding stone stair hidden behind a broken doorway, the steps narrow and steep. The Scarecrow nearly stumbled twice, and the Tin Man steadied him each time, their movements careful and determined. The higher they climbed, the colder the air grew, and the wind whistled through narrow cracks in the stone. At last, they reached a long hallway lit by dim torches that burned with a sickly green glow. At the far end stood a heavy wooden door bound with iron, the door to Dorothy's prison. Toto ran to it and scratched at the base, whining softly. Dorothy heard the sound. Her heart leapt. She rushed to the door and pressed her hands against it, calling out in a trembling whisper. The Scarecrow answered at once, his voice warm with relief. The Tin Man promised they would not leave without her. But the door was locked with thick iron bolts, and a cruel enchanted seal carved deep into the wood. The Tin Man tried to break it with his axe, but the blade bounced back as if the door were made of solid steel. The Scarecrow searched the wall for hidden catches or loose stones, but the magic held everything firm. Dorothy sank to her knees on the other side of the door. The Scarecrow felt a ripple of worry. The Tin Man felt a hollow ache where his heart should have been. Toto scratched harder, refusing to give up. Then the Scarecrow had an idea. He whispered for the Tin Man to strike the wall beside the hinges instead of the door itself. The Tin Man lifted his axe and brought it down with careful strength. The stone cracked, not loudly, but enough to loosen the frame. Blow after steady blow, the wall began to weaken. The enchanted door was strong, but the wall around it was not. With one final strike, the stone split and the frame shifted. The bolts shook loose, the hinges bent, and the door swung inward with a heavy creak. Dorothy stood there in the doorway, eyes bright with relief. Toto leapt into her arms, licking her face with joyful excitement. The Scarecrow bowed in happy gratitude. The Tin Man lowered his axe, his metal voice soft with quiet gladness. But there was no time to celebrate. A distant shout echoed through the tower. The guards had heard. The witch would soon know. Dorothy stepped into the hallway, her friends surrounding her like a living shield. The wind outside roared against the tower walls, as if urging them to run, to flee before the shadow above them fully awakened. The Scarecrow whispered that they still had one more friend to save: the lion. And somewhere in the depths of the fortress, chains rattled in the darkness. Chapter 15. Dorothy hurried down the winding tower stairs with the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and Toto close beside her. The cold stone walls echoed with distant footsteps and sharp voices rising through the fortress. The witch's servants had discovered the broken door, and the alarm was spreading like fire through every corridor. They moved quickly, following Toto as he led them through dark passages and narrow archways. At last they emerged into the open courtyard, where jagged walls rose high into the pale sky. The air smelled of dust and iron. In the center of the courtyard stood the heavy iron cage. Inside lay the lion. His mane was tangled, his body tired, his eyes half closed from exhaustion and hopeless waiting. When he saw Dorothy step into the courtyard, his eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a surge of fierce, trembling relief. He rose to his feet, the chains rattling sharply against the bars. Dorothy ran to the cage and pressed her hands against the cold iron. The lion lowered his head close to her, and for a moment, fear and darkness faded from the world. The Scarecrow and Tin Man examined the cage carefully, its bars thick, its locks sealed with magic. They could not break it with strength alone. Voices grew louder in the distance. Footsteps rushed closer. Time was slipping away. The Tin Man struck the lock with his axe, but the blow only sent a harsh, ringing echo through the courtyard. The Scarecrow searched desperately for another weakness. He noticed that the cage bars were fixed to the stone by thick bolts buried deep in the ground. If the cage could not be opened, it could be freed. With quick determination, the Tin Man brought his axe down at the base of the iron frame. The metal screeched as sparks flew across the stone. Blow after steady blow, he cut through one bolt, then another, until the cage shook beneath the lion's paws. The lion watched in silence, fear and hope rising side by side inside him. The Scarecrow helped brace the cage as the Tin Man struck the final bolt. With a heavy crack, the frame broke free from the stone. The cage tilted forward, its bars bending just enough for an opening to form. "Push!" the Scarecrow whispered. The lion gathered all his strength. With a deep breath, he forced his body through the gap. The bars scraped against his sides, his muscles straining, his claws digging into the ground. For a moment, it seemed he might not fit. Then, with one last heave, he burst free and landed on the courtyard floor, breathing hard but triumphant. Dorothy wrapped her arms around his great mane, tears shining in her eyes. The lion bowed his head gently, his voice soft and full of quiet gratitude. He said he had never felt braver than in that moment, not because he was fearless, but because his friends had come for him. Then the shouts grew nearer. Dark shadows filled the archways. The witches' guards rushed into the courtyard, their faces twisted with anger and fear. They formed a circle, blocking every exit, their weapons raised as the sound of the witch's furious cry thundered from the highest tower. The lion bared his teeth. The Tin Man lifted his axe. The Scarecrow stood firm, though his straw trembled. Dorothy stepped forward, her eyes steady, Toto growling at her heels. They were no longer scattered, no longer helpless. They stood together now, united in hope, in courage, in unspoken strength. The wind howled across the courtyard. The guards closed in. And somewhere above them, the witch's shadow moved, ready at last to face the travelers who dared to challenge her power. Chapter 16. The guards closed in around the courtyard, their eyes fierce and uncertain, as the witch's furious cry echoed through the fortress walls. A cold wind swept across the stone, and the sky above darkened as if the clouds themselves feared her anger. Then the door to the highest tower burst open. The wicked witch stepped into the light. Her cloak whipped in the wind, and her eyes burned with cold, sharp hatred. She looked down at Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the lion, and then at the shining shoes on Dorothy's feet. Her expression tightened with greed and fear, for the shoes were more powerful than anything she owned. She raised her staff. The guards stopped at once. The courtyard fell silent. The witch spoke in a voice that cut like ice, commanding Dorothy to hand over the shoes and surrender. She promised mercy, a lie that trembled beneath every word. Dorothy stood still, her heart beating fast, knowing the shoes could not be removed while she wore them. The witch knew it too. So she changed her plan. With a cruel smile, she ordered the guards to seize the lion, to break the Tin Man's body again, to rip the Scarecrow apart once more. She said that if Dorothy did not obey, her friends would suffer. The lion trembled, but did not step back. The Tin Man tightened his grip on the axe, though his voice shook. The Scarecrow placed himself in front of Dorothy, his straw shoulders straight, as if he were made of solid wood instead of cloth and hay. Dorothy felt fear twist inside her, but something stronger rose with it. She would not give up her friends. The witch slammed her staff against the ground. The floor beneath them shimmered and turned into a smooth layer of shining silver, cold, gleaming, dangerous. A strange magic filled the air, and Dorothy suddenly realized the spell was meant to trap them, to bind their feet to the reflective surface so they could not flee. The Tin Man slipped. The Scarecrow struggled to keep his balance. The lion dug his claws into the smooth floor, his muscles tense and trembling. The witch moved closer. Her eyes never left the shoes. Then she reached for a nearby bucket of water, a simple thing, left behind by a servant to clean the courtyard stones. She lifted it slowly, her grip tightening around the handle. Dorothy did not yet understand. But the witch did. Water was the one thing she feared. The one thing that could break her. And as the witch raised the bucket, fury blazing in her eyes, Dorothy saw the moment, small, sudden, shining, when chance turned into fate. Without thinking, without planning, she grabbed the bucket and threw. The water flew through the air in a bright, glittering arc. It struck the witch across her cloak, her shoulders, her face. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then the witch screamed. Not in anger. In terror. Her skin began to melt like black wax beneath a hot flame. Her cloak crumbled into smoke. Her body sank and faded into a dark, shrinking shadow that dissolved into the air. Her voice echoed one last time across the courtyard. And then she was gone. The guards froze. The wind stilled. The silver floor faded back into dull stone beneath their feet. Dorothy stood trembling, the empty bucket in her hand, the sound of the witch's final cry fading into silence. The Scarecrow stared in stunned amazement. The Tin Man lowered his axe, his metal voice shaking softly. The Lion took a deep breath, his fear slowly turning into quiet wonder. They had not planned victory. They had simply chosen courage. The guards looked at one another, and then bowed. With the witch gone, her power vanished, and the fortress no longer belonged to darkness. Dorothy dropped the bucket. The courtyard fell peaceful. But far beyond the walls, across valleys and hills, the Emerald City waited. And the wizard's promise still remained. The road home was not finished yet. Chapter 17. With the witch gone and the courtyard finally still, a quiet peace settled over the fortress. The guards lowered their weapons and stepped back, no longer cruel, no longer bound by fear. Some bowed deeply to Dorothy and her friends, as if a long-held weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Dorothy stood in the fading silence, breathing softly. The Scarecrow placed a gentle hand on her arm, his painted eyes filled with amazement. The Tin Man said, in a trembling voice, that if he had a heart, it would be overflowing. The Lion lifted his head, his chest rising with a deep, steady breath, not of fear, but of strength. They had done what the wizard asked. The witch's power was gone, and the land around them slowly began to feel alive again. Dorothy looked toward the distant horizon. Somewhere far away, the Emerald City glowed like a memory of green light. The promise of home still waited there, as distant and fragile as a single star in the twilight sky. They rested only a short while. Then they began their journey back. The fortress gates opened wide, and the path beyond stretched across quiet hills and pale fields slowly waking from shadow. The sky brightened with soft colors, as if the world itself were relieved. The wind carried the faint scent of grass instead of smoke and fear. They walked side by side. The Scarecrow stepped carefully, straw rustling softly in the breeze. The Tin Man walked with steady rhythm, the metal of his joints glimmering faintly in the sunlight. The Lion padded proudly beside them, not free from fear, but no longer ruled by it. Dorothy walked at the center, Toto trotting happily at her heels. Along the way, they passed small villages and distant farms. People peeked from doorways and windows, then slowly stepped outside, realizing the dark spell over their land had vanished. Some waved shyly. Others bowed with quiet gratitude. No grand celebrations, only simple, honest relief. The Scarecrow smiled each time someone thanked them. The Tin Man wished he could feel the warmth their gratitude deserved. The Lion lowered his head humbly, surprised that others now saw strength in him. The days of travel felt calmer than the journey before. The road no longer seemed filled with unseen dangers. The trees whispered gently instead of looming dark and twisted. The sky felt open, wide, almost hopeful. But inside Dorothy's heart, a different feeling lingered. She wondered what awaited them in the Emerald City. Would the wizard keep his promise? Would he truly send her home? Or had they risked everything only to face disappointment? The thought drifted through her mind like a quiet shadow. Still, she walked forward, because turning back was impossible, and hope was the only light she carried. At last, the familiar green glow appeared on the horizon. The tall towers of the Emerald City rose into the sky, shining in the sun like great crystal spires. The walls glimmered, and the distant gates sparkled with the same deep, glowing color they remembered. The lion took a deep breath. The Scarecrow straightened his shoulders. The Tin Man tightened his grip on the axe, not in fear, but in resolve. Dorothy touched the magic shoes at her feet. They had done everything the wizard asked. The journey had tested their strength, their kindness, their courage, and somehow, each of them had grown in ways they did not yet fully understand. The great green gates stood before them once more. The guard stepped out, eyes wide in astonishment at their return. Dorothy lifted her gaze toward the gleaming city. They had come back victorious. But the truth behind the Emerald Palace was still hidden, waiting. Chapter 18. Dorothy and her friends once again walked through the gleaming streets of the Emerald City. The green stones shone beneath their feet, and the tall crystal towers reflected the light like quiet, watching giants. People paused as they passed, whispering softly, not with curiosity this time, but with wonder. The witch was gone. The land was free. And the travelers had returned. They were led through winding halls to the great palace once more. The same tall doors, the same cool green glow, the same vast silence awaited them. Dorothy felt her heart beat faster as they stepped inside the great hall where the wizard's voice had once thundered through the air. This time, they did not come as hopeful strangers. They came with a promise fulfilled. The bright green light flared ahead of them. The great voice rose again, deep, powerful, echoing across the chamber, asking why they had returned. Dorothy lifted her chin and spoke with calm strength. She told the voice that the wicked witch was gone, that they had done everything he asked, and now they had come for what he had promised. A long silence followed. Then the voice answered, but something in its tone felt different. Less certain. Less mighty. It trembled like distant thunder fading into the sky. The Scarecrow stepped forward and asked for his brain. The Tin Man asked for his heart. The lion asked for courage. Dorothy asked for the way home. The green light pulsed. The voice hesitated. Then, suddenly, Toto growled. The small dog ran across the hall, ears high, paw steps echoing lightly on the glassy floor. He slipped past the pillars and into a corner hidden in the shadows. Dorothy turned in surprise and hurried after him. There, behind a tall green screen, stood a small, gray-haired man pulling levers and turning wheels. Pipes hissed. Lights flickered. A machine rattled softly beside him. His eyes widened in shock when he saw Toto tugging at the edge of his coat. Dorothy gasped. The man spun around, panic flooding his face. He shouted for them not to look, not to notice the truth, and called desperately into a brass tube, trying to revive the great booming voice. But it was too late. The Scarecrow stepped around the screen. The Tin Man followed. The lion stared in stunned silence. The wizard was not a giant spirit. Not a powerful glowing figure. Not a being of magic at all. He was only a man. The hall fell quiet. The man's shoulders slumped. His voice lost its echo. He confessed, softly, ashamed, that he had no magic. He was clever, skillful, good with machines and tricks of light and sound, but not a wizard of power. He said he had come to this land long ago by accident, in a strange flying device that had fallen from the sky. The people had believed him great and mighty, and he had let them believe it. Fear and expectation had grown around him until he no longer knew how to step out from behind the illusion. Dorothy felt disappointment settle in her chest like a heavy stone. The Scarecrow was silent. The Tin Man lowered his head. The Lion swallowed hard. The world they thought they trusted suddenly felt fragile. But the man looked at them with sincere eyes. He was not cruel, not wicked, only deeply, painfully human. He said he could not give magic, but he could still help. He promised to give them symbols of what they sought, reminders that the things they longed for might already live within them. He asked only one thing in return, a chance to make things right instead of hiding in fear. Dorothy listened quietly. The shining hall no longer glowed with mystery. It felt smaller, truer. The Emerald City was still beautiful, but the truth behind its power had changed everything. And yet, somewhere beyond disappointment, a new kind of hope slowly began to wake. Chapter 19. The great hall stood quiet as the truth settled around them like soft dust in the green light. The man who had once seemed mighty and mysterious now stood small and humble before Dorothy and her friends. His hands trembled slightly, and his voice was gentle, filled with regret and honesty. He said he could not change the world with spells or command great powers, but he could still give something meaningful. He believed that sometimes the greatest strength was not magic at all, but faith, courage, and the way a heart chose to see itself. He turned first to the Scarecrow. From a small polished box, he carefully took out a fine, silvery needle and delicate thread, and then a curious little bag filled with tiny, shining beads and curled bits of wire. With great care and respect, he placed the small bag inside the Scarecrow's head and stitched it closed again, speaking softly as he worked. He said that these things would not create true thought, but they would remind the Scarecrow that wisdom often grows from kindness, reflection, and the courage to learn. The Scarecrow touched his patched head and smiled. For the first time, he felt no doubt in himself, only quiet confidence that he could think, could reason, could understand. Next, the man turned to the Tin Man. He opened another velvet box and lifted out a bright, heart-shaped charm made of red glass framed in silver. It shimmered softly in the emerald light, warm despite its metal edges. He fastened it gently to the Tin Man's chest with loving care. He explained that the charm could not create real feelings, but it would remind the Tin Man that compassion, tenderness, and love had already lived in his actions from the beginning. The Tin Man lifted his shining face and placed his hand carefully over the heart. His voice trembled as he thanked the man, wishing more than ever that he could truly feel the emotion swelling quietly inside him. Then the man turned to the Lion. From a small wooden case, he took out a fine ribbon tied carefully around a tiny medal engraved with proud symbols of bravery. He placed it around the lion's mane and rested his hand gently against the lion's shoulder. He said that the medal could not erase fear, but courage was never the lack of fear. Courage was choosing to act in spite of it. The lion bowed his head, eyes shining softly. In that moment, he understood that every step he had taken on the journey, trembling, uncertain, yet determined, had been courage all along. The hall fell silent. No magic had flashed. No spells had glowed. Yet something deep inside each of them changed. They did not feel empty. They felt complete. Dorothy watched her friends with quiet warmth, proud of who they had become, grateful for everything they had shared together. But a small ache still rested in her heart. She looked at the man gently and asked in a soft voice, "What about me? How do I go home?" The man's face grew thoughtful. He said he did not yet know the path, but he would try. Somewhere inside his heart, he believed there must be a way, and he'd promised that he would not abandon her. He asked her to trust him just a little longer. Dorothy nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes like a distant cloud across a bright sky. She believed him, but the road ahead was still unknown. Outside the palace walls, the Emerald City glowed peacefully, calm and bright. Inside, hope and doubt stood side by side. The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion each felt stronger in their own quiet way. Dorothy looked toward the great doors of the hall, wondering, was the way home still somewhere out there? Or had it been beside her all along, waiting to be seen? Chapter 20. The Emerald Palace grew quiet after the gifts were given. Soft green light drifted across the tall walls, and the great hall felt calmer, smaller, and more human than before. Dorothy stood beside the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, each of them changed in their own quiet way, yet her heart still waited for one final answer. She looked at the small gray-haired man, no longer a wizard, only a traveler lost far from home, and asked gently if he knew how she might return to the world she came from. The man paced slowly across the polished floor, deep in thought. His eyes turned toward the high windows, where sunlight shimmered like thin gold threads against the green crystal. After a long moment, his face brightened with a spark of memory. He spoke softly of the strange flying craft that had once carried him across the sky, a great silk balloon that rose into the clouds like a drifting globe of wind and light. He explained that when it broke free long ago, it had carried him to this land by accident, and perhaps it could carry someone away again. Dorothy's heart fluttered with hope. If the balloon could rise into the sky, if the wind blew the right way, it might carry her back over the vast plains, back toward the little wooden house, back to her aunt and uncle who still waited beneath a lonely gray sky. The man promised to rebuild it. Not with magic, but with patience, skill, and determination. He led them to a quiet courtyard behind the palace, where tall towers cast long, gentle shadows across the stone. There, hidden beneath green tarps and dusty ropes, lay the remains of the old airship, a great woven basket, tangled ropes, and folded silken cloth as pale as morning clouds. The Scarecrow helped gather the ropes. The Tin Man tightened the metal fastenings with careful precision. The Lion watched the sky, wary yet hopeful, while Toto ran in small excited circles around the basket. The man worked tirelessly, stitching torn seams, sealing leaks, and shaping the balloon's great round form until it rose above them like a sleeping moon waiting to awaken. A tall copper burner was fixed beneath it, ready to fill the silk with warm, drifting air. For the first time since arriving in that strange land, Dorothy felt the pull of home grow so close she could almost touch it. But as the balloon neared completion, a soft sadness settled over their small group. The Scarecrow stood quietly beside her. The Tin Man lowered his head. The Lion's tail brushed slowly across the stone. If Dorothy left, she would leave them behind. They had walked through forests and fields together, crossed danger and fear together, shared laughter and tears and the fragile warmth of trust. The thought of parting felt heavy, like a hush that lingered in the air. Dorothy pressed her hand gently against the Scarecrow's arm, touched the Tin Man's shining shoulder, and buried her face for a moment in the Lion's soft mane. She whispered that she would never forget them, that they would always live within her heart, no matter how far she traveled. The Lion blinked back tears he could finally understand. The Tin Man wiped his eyes, though they held no real tears at all. The Scarecrow smiled bravely, though his voice trembled. At last, the balloon stood ready. Its great silk body swelled gently in the warm rising air. The ropes creaked softly. The basket waited like a doorway to the sky itself. The man climbed inside and reached out his hand to Dorothy, his voice calm and steady. The wind sighed across the courtyard. The city grew still. Dorothy looked up at the drifting balloon, then down at her friends one last time. The moment of departure had come. And the sky, vast, pale, and full of silent promise, waited above. Chapter 21. The great silk balloon swelled gently in the warm air, rising higher above the palace courtyard like a pale, drifting moon. Its ropes creaked softly, and the woven basket trembled as the burner flickered with a low, steady flame. The people of the Emerald City gathered below, their green robes shimmering as they watched in silent wonder. Dorothy stood at the edge of the basket, Toto in her arms, her heart filled with hope and aching sadness all at once. The man, no longer a wizard, only a traveler lost like her, stood beside her, his hands steady on the ropes as he prepared for the moment of flight. The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion gathered close beneath the rising balloon. The Scarecrow smiled, gentle and proud. The Tin Man placed his metal hand over the bright heart-shaped charm on his chest. The Lion lifted his head high, though his eyes were soft and shining. Dorothy wanted to speak, to thank them, to promise she would remember every step of their journey, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she looked into their faces and felt everything she could not say resting quietly in the warmth of that single moment. The wind shifted. The balloon tugged at its ropes. The man called for the ropes to be released. But just as Dorothy leaned forward with Toto held tightly in her arms, a sudden gust swept across the courtyard. It rushed through the towers, across the rooftops, and beneath the balloon like an invisible wave. The basket lurched. The ropes slipped free before Dorothy could climb inside. The balloon rose. Slowly at first, then faster. The man gasped and reached out, but Dorothy stood on the ground, her hand lifted helplessly as the basket drifted upward without her. Toto barked wildly, his little voice echoing through the courtyard. The Scarecrow cried out to the sky. The Tin Man reached upward with trembling arms. The Lion roared, not in fear, but in heartbreaking protest. The man leaned over the edge of the basket, his face filled with sorrow. He shouted that he could not stop it. The wind had taken control. The balloon drifted higher and higher, its pale shape growing smaller as it floated toward the distant clouds. He called out that he would try to return if he could. Then the wind carried him away. The sky closed around him. And he was gone. Silence fell over the courtyard. Dorothy stood motionless, tears filling her eyes as the last glimmer of the balloon faded into the bright wide sky. The hope she had held so close slipped through her fingers like a dream dissolving in the morning light. Toto pressed his warm little body against her chest. The Scarecrow stepped beside her and placed a gentle straw hand on her shoulder. The Tin Man spoke softly, his voice filled with aching sympathy. The Lion lowered his great head and rested it near her side, as if offering strength through silent presence alone. Dorothy whispered that she had lost her chance, that the road home was gone. For a moment, the world felt empty. The sky, so wide and endless, seemed to stretch forever, beautiful and unreachable, like a promise carried out of sight. But the Scarecrow spoke gently. He said their journey was not over. Not yet. Somewhere in that vast and wondrous land, there might still be another path, another answer, another way she had not yet seen. The Tin Man agreed in quiet hope. The Lion lifted his gaze with new resolve. Dorothy wiped her tears and looked out across the shining Emerald City. The balloon had vanished into the sky. But her story, and the road home, had not yet come to an end. Chapter 22. The sky was bright and empty where the balloon had vanished, and the wind drifted softly across the emerald rooftops as if nothing at all had happened. But Dorothy stood still in the courtyard, her heart heavy, her hopes scattered like dust in the air. Toto rested quietly in her arms, and her friends stayed close beside her, silent and steady. The Scarecrow spoke first, his voice gentle and thoughtful. He said that even without the balloon, there must be another way, for every journey, no matter how lost it seemed, always carried more than one path. The Tin Man nodded, saying that he would search every corner of the world if it meant helping her find her way home. The Lion added softly that he would walk through any danger, no matter how afraid he felt inside. Their words warmed Dorothy's heart, though sadness still surrounded her. They left the courtyard and walked through the emerald streets, quieter now than before. People bowed as they passed, grateful and kind, but Dorothy barely noticed. Her thoughts drifted back to the Great Plains, the small wooden house, the faces of her aunt and uncle waiting beneath the wide, lonely sky. At last, they reached a quiet garden behind the palace, a place filled with soft grass, bright flowers, and gentle fountains that whispered like tiny streams of glass. Dorothy sat on a stone bench beneath a tall tree, the leaves spreading above her like a green umbrella. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, from the air itself, a faint shimmer appeared, like a ray of morning light bending through water. The kind woman in white stepped gracefully into the garden. Her gown glowed softly, her eyes warm and calm. She smiled at Dorothy with a tenderness that felt like sunlight touching a cold window. Dorothy hurried to her and asked, in a trembling voice, if she knew any way, any small, distant, hidden way, for her to return home. The woman listened quietly. Then she knelt and looked gently at the shoes on Dorothy's feet, the shining, magical shoes she had worn since the very beginning of her journey. She said that those shoes had always known the secret. They carried a power not of distance, but of belonging, a magic that could take Dorothy anywhere her heart truly called home. They had waited for the right moment, for the right understanding, for the right strength within her to awaken. Dorothy stared in astonishment. All this time, the path had been beneath her steps. The woman explained that journeys are sometimes meant not to discover new magic, but to discover the courage and wisdom already living inside. Dorothy's friends had found their strength along the road, and now it was her turn to trust what she already carried. Dorothy's heart fluttered like a small bird lifting its wings. She looked at the Scarecrow, wise and steady. She looked at the Tin Man, gentle and compassionate. She looked at the Lion, brave in his trembling courage. She realized that everything she had learned, every danger faced, every tear shed, every moment of hope, had led her to this understanding. The woman in white smiled softly. She told Dorothy that when she was ready, she needed only to close her eyes, tap the shoes together, and think of home with all her heart. Dorothy felt tears rise, not of sorrow this time, but of gratitude. She embraced the Scarecrow, her dear thoughtful friend. She held the Tin Man's metal hands and thanked him for his kindness. She buried her face in the Lion's warm mane, whispering that he was braver than anyone she had ever known. The garden glowed with soft, golden light. The wind fell still. The shoes shimmered faintly beneath her feet. And Dorothy understood that the moment was coming, the moment when the road ahead would finally turn toward home. Chapter 23. The garden glowed softly in the afternoon light, and the air felt warm and still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Dorothy stood among the flowers with Toto in her arms, surrounded by the friends who had walked beside her through every danger, every fear, every hope. The Scarecrow stepped forward first. His straw rustled gently in the breeze as he looked at Dorothy with quiet warmth. He told her that before their journey began, he had believed himself empty, a figure of cloth and straw with nothing inside but doubt. But walking beside her had taught him to think, to choose, to understand. If wisdom lived anywhere in him now, it lived because she had trusted him. Dorothy smiled through soft tears and hugged him tightly, feeling the fragile cloth beneath her arms, yet sensing the strength within his gentle spirit. The Tin Man approached next. The small, shining heart on his chest glowed faintly in the light. His metal voice trembled as he said that he had feared he would never know what it meant to care. Yet every step of the journey had shown him that kindness was not made of flesh, but of actions. If a real heart ever beat inside him, it would be forever shaped by their friendship. Dorothy pressed her hands over his smooth metal palms and whispered her thanks, wishing he could feel how deeply he was already loved. Then the lion came close. His great mane brushed her cheek as he lowered his head, his voice soft and unsteady. He said he had always believed himself a coward, but when he walked beside Dorothy, he discovered that courage could tremble, could fear, could doubt, and still move forward. He was brave not because he was fearless, but because he cared enough to face his fear. Dorothy wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his warm fur. Toto pressed his nose against the lion's paw, as if sharing the moment with his own small, steady courage. The woman in white watched quietly, her eyes filled with gentle understanding. The leaves of the tall tree rustled softly above them. The fountains whispered like distant memories. The world felt full, and tender, and bittersweet. Dorothy lifted her head and looked at her friends one last time. She thanked the Scarecrow for his wisdom. She thanked the Tin Man for his kindness. She thanked the lion for his brave and trembling heart. She told them that no matter how far away she traveled, across plains, across skies, across worlds, they would always live within her. Their friendship would follow her like a quiet star shining through every night sky she would ever know. The Scarecrow bowed his head. The Tin Man placed his hand gently over his heart. The lion closed his eyes and breathed deeply, steady and strong. The woman in white stepped closer and rested a soft hand on Dorothy's shoulder. She asked gently if Dorothy was ready. Dorothy nodded. The garden fell silent. The air shimmered with faint golden light. The shoes upon her feet glowed softly, as though they remembered every step she had ever taken, every forest, every field, every dream, every tear. Dorothy closed her eyes. She held Toto close. And with a deep, steady breath, she prepared to call her heart home. Chapter 24. Dorothy stood in the quiet garden beneath the shining sky, her friends gathered around her like warm memories, made real. The air shimmered softly, and the world felt still, as if every leaf, every flower, every whispering fountain watched the moment with gentle care. She held Toto close and closed her eyes. The shoes glowed beneath her feet, warm and alive, as though they carried every step of her journey inside their shining magic. Dorothy breathed deeply and filled her heart with one single thought: the little wooden house, the flat gray plains, the still sky, the quiet faces waiting for her far away. The world began to fade. Not with noise, not with fear, but with softness, like a dream slowly loosening its hold. The garden dissolved into light. The flowers vanished into air. The warm breeze slipped away like a sigh. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but gentle brightness, and then the light faded. Dorothy felt solid ground beneath her feet. The air was dry and still. The sky above was pale and gray, quiet and familiar. She opened her eyes. She stood beside her small wooden house on the wide, empty plain. The tall grasses whispered softly in the wind. The land stretched out in every direction, vast and silent beneath the low horizon. Toto barked joyfully and wriggled in her arms. The front door burst open. Her aunt rushed toward her with tears in her eyes, her face filled with shock and fierce relief. Her uncle followed, silent but trembling, his weathered hands shaking as he reached out to her. Dorothy fell into their arms. Warmth. Home. Not bright. Not magical. But real, deeply, quietly real. The house was still plain. The land was still gray. The sky was still heavy and still. Yet everything felt different. Because Dorothy had changed. She thought of the Scarecrow's gentle wisdom, the Tin Man's quiet kindness, the Lion's trembling courage. She felt their presence inside her, not as dreams, not as distant figures, but as living strength woven softly into her heart. Home was no longer only a place. It was a feeling, carried within her wherever she walked. Her aunt held her tightly, afraid to let go. Her uncle whispered her name like a prayer. Toto barked again and spun in excited circles across the dry yard. Dorothy looked across the endless plain. Somewhere far away, beyond fields, beyond forests, beyond lands of magic and wonder, a shining city still glowed beneath a distant sky. A scarecrow watched the wind with thoughtful eyes. A tin man listened to the world with gentle care. A lion walked proudly through tall grass, brave as the rising dawn. They were not gone. They lived within the paths she had walked. Within the stories she carried. Within the girl who had returned. Dorothy smiled softly and rested her hand over her heart. The journey had ended. The road had led her home. And somewhere deep inside her, the world of wonder would always shine. Thank you for listening to this retelling of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, shared with you here on Your Daily Audiobook. If this journey touched your heart, if it sparked imagination, courage, or wonder, stay with us for more stories, more adventures, and more worlds waiting to be discovered. Until the next tale, keep dreaming, keep exploring, and remember, every story lives on inside you.